I must begin by saying what a pleasure it is to be here with all of you. I think it's really an amazing initiative taken by Jindal University to initiate a program like this. Because the more we have of these programs, the better. Because we have so few programs which actually focus on what we call development practice. And I've been part of many initiatives to start such programs. Naren is here. You'd remember at AUD, Pradhan collaborated to start a development practice program. I don't know whether it still exists. So, all of these programs have struggled. And it's so pleasing that this initiative has been taken. So when Prachi contacted me, I had no hesitation in agreeing to come and, share my thoughts with all of you. This is the dominant policy discourse of the time. Not only in India, across the world, we have been told that, for example, Nehru bashing never stops in this country. It begins with that. Oh, those were the bad days when everything was wrong with India. And a lot of people call it the new freedom struggle. 1991 is seen as the dawn of a new era of Indian independence almost. And so I think I'm here to sort of speak a few words of caution against that kind of fundamentalism. Actually, all fundamentalisms are bad. And any kind of fundamentalism, if it gains ground without critical reflection, can be very dangerous. And that's the kind of thinking I wanted to share with you today. So I think all of you know LPG refers to this regime of liberalization, privatization, globalization. The logic is simple. The more competition there is, it will benefit the consumer, because when firms compete with each other, when they are in a process of competition, they strive to produce something which is of better quality, and they are compelled to produce it at a lower price so that consumers buy what they produce. I also want to say, at any point, please feel free to stop me. My classes are always deeply interactive. They can be sometimes quite chaotic, but the greater the chaos, the better the learning is my view. Because it's not actually chaos, it promotes learning. So please feel free to stop me at any point if I'm saying something which you don't understand, don't agree with, have a completely different point of view. It's good to question. Sorry to all the professors in the room, but it's good to question whoever is teaching you, because a classroom also is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about common pool resources. So this is also commons. A classroom is a commons, and the health of a classroom is nurtured by collective action. So it's true of all common pool resources, and that's one of my serious questions about the LPG regime. So please feel free. I mean, if you don't feel like questioning also, it's okay, but if you have a question, don't hesitate and don't wait till the end of the class. Let's try and make it a lively, interactive classroom. So the logic of competition is clear, and the benefits of competition are also clear. I'm not one to argue against the need for greater competition. It actually helps a lot, and since the 1990s, when the process was initiated in India, you can see the benefits. You can see the benefits in the IT sector, you can see the benefits in telecom, you can see in luxury consumer goods. I mean, people who can afford these goods are having a great time. And this has led to a burgeoning middle class in India, etc. And all kinds of stories are written about how great a country we have become. So, this being true, my question is, which are the most important problems facing the Indian people? And by Indian people, I don't mean people who come to hotels like the one we are in today. I mean, I was just asking Sanket why this is the case, so he was giving some explanation, and there must be some good reason. But the vast majority of India doesn't live in these circumstances. And what is sad to see is that nearly 80 years since independence, we haven't yet found a sustained, equitable solution to these absolutely fundamental problems that face the Indian people. If you wish, you can add others, because I've just done a selection of what I thought everyone would agree are the most important problems. If anyone has any other suggestion, we can definitely include this in this table of the most important problems. But my point today will be, has the LPG regime actually succeeded, or does it seem likely to succeed in solving any of these problems, whether it's food and nutrition, water and sanitation, education or health? My contention is that you cannot have a magic bullet solution to problems like these. So, what is the main reason why LPG doesn't work for these problems? And my simple point is that, after all, this is a capitalist economy. A capitalist economy is the most dynamic economy ever in the history of mankind. You've never had a more dynamic, rapidly growing economic system than capitalism. And you know, the person who said that was one of the biggest critics of capitalism, that is Karl Marx himself. I mean, he says it's a revolutionary system. And it is. It's a system which overthrew everything that went before it. But the fundamental defining feature of a capitalist system is that capitalists are trying to fulfill their goal of profit maximization. You all familiar with that? Right? So, you can't blame a capitalist. I mean, that's what I always tell my students. ये उनका धर्म है. उनका धर्म है profit maximize करना. आप कह रहे हो आप education भी करो. I will do education so long as I can maximize my profit. I will provide health care so long as I can maximize my profits. Profit maximization is my dharma. Don't tell me to look after people, to do welfare, to provide food, etc. That's not my goal is profit maximization. In that process, if some people get educated, some people get healthcare, good. But that is not the primary commitment, mandate or goal of the production that capitalists undertake. Having said that, what is the implication? The implication is that in regions and among communities who do not have enough in their pockets to afford the kinds of fees or the hospital tariffs which would enable the capitalists to make profits, those people get excluded. It's the simple logic of capitalism. You cannot say that privatization or the promotion of capitalist intervention in any of these sectors will lead to an inclusive form of development where every child in this country, every human being in this country is either taken care of in terms of the basic needs which I put together in the previous slide. And one simple way of putting it is that in these situations, the private rate of return, PRR, is the private rate of return. You understand rate of return? When I put in some money, I make an investment. Why do I make the investment? You know, it's a big risk for a capitalist to put in so much money from his own pocket. It's a huge risk. It's an investment. So I want a return on that capital. I have put in some money. I need that I should be able to make enough profit for me to make that investment. In these situations, in the most disadvantaged regions of this country, among the most disadvantaged communities of this country, people do not have that much money in their pockets. I sometimes call it to my students pocket disease. They have a pocket disease. They have a problem with their pockets. जेबें खाली हैं. So, if a capitalist has to make profit out of running a school or a hospital, the capitalist has to charge a certain fees. After all, you know, they are employing so many teachers, doctors, nurses, everything, equipment, that much investment. How will I earn profit? If I charge high fees. If you charge high fees, your private rate of return will be enough for you to have the incentive to invest. See, you must remember, capitalists can invest in many directions. They don't have to go into health and education. But if you are thinking of health and education, you will go to areas where people can afford to pay what you charge. So that's why only in that condition the private rate of return is enough for a capitalist to find it profitable enough to invest in health and education. So we say typically the private rate of return is less than the social rate of return. What is the social rate of return? Social rate of return, you could call it the national rate of return, is one where a society or a country has a lot to gain from the investment that you're making. That rate of return cannot be calculated on the narrow metric of profits. Essentially, it is about creating a healthy workforce, an educated, set of young people, so that the so-called demographic dividend can be actually benefited from. A country which has healthy people, educated people, that population, which is a young population in India, for example, it's in great danger of, the country is in great danger of losing the benefit of the demographic dividend if we do not invest in health and education. And the problem is, so because the private rate of return is less than the social rate of return in these sectors, the private sector does not invest. It ignores these sectors, especially for the marginalized people, and that is what in development economics is called market failure. So this is a classic example, one of the classic, there are many examples, some of which we'll come to. So these sectors which I'm talking about suffer from what we call market failure, and therefore government intervention becomes necessary, but we'll come to that. So let's take another example. We focused on health education. Now food, look at this sector. See, a capitalist system works best where there is huge competition among a large number of buyers and sellers. When you read Economics 101, what you are taught is that, look, if there are a very large number of buyers and a very large number of sellers, you get perfect competition, and that, through the working of the so-called invisible hand, leads to everyone living happily ever after. So you should expect that in agriculture, in the food sector, it should be possible that markets function well, because you have a very large number of farmers, right, and an even large number of consumers. So it should be possible for the market to function well. But what happens? There is catastrophic market failure in food. And why does that happen? Just imagine. So there is a bumper harvest. So farmers have put in, all their energy, and they have a favorable monsoon, etc. And you get a very good harvest. Now you must carefully think about the nature of the agriculture sector. By the way, the readings in which all this is explained, I am attaching at the end of this presentation. All of you, this is for you. This is an open source material. Please use it widely, discuss it, and you can read also. So agriculture is a very particular kind of sphere of production. What is this nature of this sphere of production? That all farmers who are producing a certain crop come to the market at the same time, right? Because there is seasonality in agriculture. So all farmers come to the market with their produce at the same time, unlike a Maruti car factory, which will produce cars every day. So, just focus on the differences. I can't go into too much detail. Prachi is a very hard taskmaster. She's given me only 30 minutes, so I have to be very careful not to exceed. And please stop me when I will lose track, where I'm going right now. I was about to introduce the island of Bali, so I won't do that. Because the island of Bali is one place, now that I've said it, where you can actually produce. Every day you can go to the harvest. Because the weather through the year remains almost the same. So you can actually sequentialize, on different farms, different agricultural operations. But that's probably the only place on earth. This is discussed in a book, very great book by my guru, Nicholas Georgescu Rogan, called Entropy, Law and the Economic Process. So to all the faculty here, I would strongly recommend this book. It's kind of a foundational text for ecological economics. So anyway, let me stop these digressions in the short time that I've been given. So what happens typically is that because all farmers come to harvest at the same time, if there's a bumper harvest, what will happen? Prices will fall. And then you have a basic concept, fundamental concept of economics called the price elasticity of demand. So what is the price elasticity of demand?
So if the price falls, the demand actually falls. I mean, it's contingent upon the price.
No, so when price falls, what happens to demand? Demand will increase, right? When something is cheaper, you're going to buy more of it. The elasticity of demand tells you how much more of it, what proportion, what is the percentage of demand that will increase when price will fall. Typically for food, the price elasticity of demand is high or low? Yes, low, that's right. Low means what? If a Mercedes becomes cheaper, a lot of people in this country will start buying Mercedes. But if grain becomes cheaper, you will buy it to the extent you need it. You can't keep eating more wheat if the wheat price falls, right? So that's called low price elasticity of demand. So normally, if I'm a Mercedes producer and I'm able to reduce the cost of production and therefore the price of a Mercedes, I can increase my profits because I can sell more cars. I hope it's not difficult to understand. I'm trying hardest to make it as simple as possible. So, but in food it doesn't happen. So when there is a bumper harvest, farmers make a loss. And conversely, when there is a drought and there is less food production, the prices rise. But again, the consumers have to buy what they have to for survival, right? So the consumers suffer. So price elasticity of demand in the case of food and the nature of the seasonality of agricultural production, to put it in brief, means that there is catastrophic market failure. You cannot rely on the market to arrive at an outcome which is supposed to be ensured by the invisible hand and everybody lives happily ever after. They don't. And that's why government intervenes in the market for food. Since the 1970s in India, that's been happening through the MSP regime, the procurement, which is much maligned again today. So I'm making a defense of that system, making you understand why that system came into place in the first place. And of course it needs to be improved, and I don't have time to get into that right now. But you need state intervention in sectors like agriculture because of the nature of the agriculture sector and the kind of features it has. And it's a very basic necessity of life. There was huge hunger and starvation before the Green Revolution. Green Revolution was not only about technology, it was also about state intervention in the market for food. So yes, I am making a case for government intervention. But the problem is, government intervention, which happens, by the way, in all countries, all advanced capitalist economies, historically have intervened in education, in health, in food. Right now, Mr. Trump is doing this horrible thing that he's pushing us to remove our support for our farmers. And I'm glad the government of India, when Mr. Modi first went to the US, I wrote an article because, when he became Prime Minister, first time he went to the US, I urged him, please don't succumb to US pressure on taking away the regime for food security in India. And since then he has resisted. So till today, and that's why Trump is very angry and he's doing all kinds of things. But that is what we are talking about, that actually in Europe and the US, there is huge subsidy for their farmers. So it's a very double standards kind of situation where they are doing government intervention, but they want to advocate free market for those countries like India because they want to open up the Indian market for their products, right? So all I'm saying right now for our purposes, somebody's pen has fallen. Government does intervene. The difficulty, however, is that government intervention does not necessarily produce the best outcomes either. And the best example of that, again, is health and education in India. So right from independence, because this was the orthodoxy of development economics, when India becomes independent, all colonial, post-colonial countries decided that they need government intervention in health and education. So the idea was that everywhere there will be government schools, government hospitals, but look at what we have achieved. In nearly 8 years since independence, our public expenditure on health and education remains among the lowest in the world as a percentage of GDP. The quality of education, as we know from the ASER reports, is abysmally low. Our hospitals are understaffed, under-equipped. And so, government intervention by itself has not ensured the kind of outcomes we wanted. So, while LPG is not a panacea, it turns out that government intervention by itself is also not a magic bullet. And so this is what I thought I should introduce you, the concept of what is a wicked problem. See, so these issues that we are talking about are not amenable to simplistic thinking, simplistic solutions. You need to understand the nature of what has been called a wicked problem since the famous paper by Weber in 1973. There are many problems, real life problems which we face, which are not actually taught in the basic textbooks of economics 101 all over the world. It's very tragic. Only people like Dipanshu are now challenging that. And you know, a lot of us have been challenging it for some time, that this is not relevant economics. You're teaching an economics which has nothing to do with the real world problems that we have. And the concept of wicked problems is a very useful one to try and understand what we need to do. First point about a wicked problem is that there are no magic bullets. Privatize kar do, sab theek ho jayega. So LPG was going on. Before that, everybody said, no, nationalization is the answer. So nationalize everything, everything will be all right. No, it won't. The reason is that there are a multiplicity of factors which are deeply interconnected with each other, which cause many of these problems. And I'll explain this with some examples. And you need a transdisciplinary approach. Economists alone cannot solve this problem. Sociologists alone cannot solve this problem. No single discipline. See, these academic disciplines arose for a certain reason historically, and I don't have time to go into that. But real world problems have a different nature. They are not amenable to just being solved by an economist, just because, you know, economists are in the, you know, the Brahmins of this hierarchy of academia and social science, where they are, I mean, sociologists, I was in Delhi School of Economics. The sociology department, the way it was treated, I mean, it's shocking, you know. They were really regarded as these untouchables who, you know, don't know anything. They are all qualitative people who do surveys, and उनको ज़्यादा कुछ आता नहीं है. एक तो statistics नहीं आती, econometrics नहीं आती, etc. So forgive, I mean, economists may forgive me, but that's a fact of the case all over the world. And we have to understand that you need academic disciplines and you need a lot of practical experience. That's why this program is so important. Development practice must become the lexicon of academia. If you want to solve India's problems or the world's problems, we have to speak of development practice, which means we are talking of learning from experience, and we are also talking of multi-stakeholder solutions. So it's the government has to be involved, the markets have to be involved, but the communities, the stakeholders, the primary stakeholders, the custodians of what I am calling CPRs. So I was just referring to that as I started the class, that common pool resources, these are all common pool resources. They are not resources amenable to privatization, and they are not resources amenable to nationalization, because the community has to be centrally involved in finding solutions to problems which arise vis-a-vis CPRs. Is that clear? Any questions on, because this is maybe a relatively new concept for you, but anyway, you can read more about it and we can talk more about it. So I just want to illustrate the point, the example of water. Because to my mind, water is India's most important problem. It's the foundation of the economy. When I was in the Planning Commission, Dr. Manmohan Singh asked me to, prepare a draft for a lecture he was to give on water. And I said, sir, we never recognize water as the most important infrastructure sector. Infrastructure kya hota hai? We look at it as airports and ports and roads and railways and steel, but we don't realize that water is at the foundation of all of these. If you do not have water, your economy cannot grow at whatever rate that you may want to imagine, and you should not grow at unreasonable rates, because you have to understand that the natural resources are the ecosystem within which the economy functions. And that's what we have forgotten. That's another major challenge I'm posing to you, that we have to understand that an economy is a small subset of the larger ecosystem. And today, at the time of the Anthropocene, when we are facing human-induced climate change, this is the lesson we must carry. But to come back to water in India, generally we say there's a major water problem, which there is, but actually there is no shortage of water in this country. And I've just given you the basic facts here. I'm not going to read them out. You can just look at them and think about it. The problem is the governance and management of water. It's the resource which we have completely misgoverned and mismanaged, and that is the reason why there is a real water crisis in this country. So, if you continue with business as usual, the estimate is that by just in a few years' time, half of the demand for water will remain unmet. And water tables are falling, water quality is falling. In 60% of India's districts, they have issues. In Punjab, for example, there's uranium. In the groundwater, actually right next to the Jindal campus, that's a very big hub of water quality problems. And this has arisen because we have blindly over-extracted groundwater all over the country. So in Punjab, there are villages, from where a train runs to the medical capitals of India. It's called the Cancer Express, because there is such an explosion of cancer because of the kind of water that is coming in, drinking water in that region. And our major river systems are drying up. So these are all studies which have well documented what's happening to our river systems because of the overexploitation of groundwater. We have the base flows of these rivers are drying up, and with climate change and the kind of conflicts that you can see around water, this has become a very real problem. So just to illustrate my point, now is privatization the answer? Because that's what the reformers are telling us. The problem is we have not privatized enough. So let's examine water. Groundwater is India's most important source of water. India is the largest consumer of groundwater in the world. China and the US come number 2 and number 3. The total consumption of groundwater by China and the US is less than India's. If you add China and US, it's still less than India. So India is such a heavily groundwater dependent country. And it is the overexploitation of groundwater which is leading to falling water tables, drying of rivers, and this is arising because of unbridled, competitive, private extraction of groundwater. So groundwater is entirely a private resource. It's either farmers or industry who are extracting groundwater. Coca-Cola extracted so much groundwater in Plachimada village in Kerala that the Plachimada village panchayat did not have enough drinking water in its hand pumps because of the over extraction by Coca-Cola. So how can you say that privatization is a solution to a problem which has been created by the existing private extraction of the most important source of water? So clearly privatization is not the way to go. But then can therefore be another magic bullet? A lot of people, when I was in the planning commission, there was a lot of pressure on me. I was handling water resources that the problem is these states are fighting. Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu fighting over the Kaveri. It's a big issue, and planning commission very excised, Supreme Court very excised, everybody is very troubled. So they said, why don't we nationalize water? And they would give the example of Israel. Not remembering that Israel is such a small country, and you cannot talk of Israel when you're talking about India. But India always has a fascination for what goes on abroad. You can also wangle a few trips. So all that used to go on. Now they won't go because of various reasons, as you all know. But the fact is that water in India, on the one hand, you look at the river systems. River systems have had huge government intervention. So 400,000 crores has been spent in constructing large dams. All that investment has come from the government, right? And there has been huge cost and time overruns. I've given you references where you get all the data, and I put this all together when I was in the planning commission. That absurd kinds of more than 1,000% cost overrun. I don't even know how, what figure that would come to. 1,000%, just imagine. So when a dam started the construction, it had a certain cost, but by the time it was completed, it had 1,000 times cost overrun. So extremely inefficient government systems full of corruption. Like when the UPA government was voted out, so there's a lot of talk of corruption. So coal and telecom and all kinds of things and all kinds of figures were also bandied about, maybe right, wrong. But certain kinds of sectors, infrastructure sectors, were recognized for corruption. The one sector which was never, seen clearly is water. Water has been a source of huge corruption. So government systems, typically bureaucratized, in the control of people who had no hesitation to make the money, and a lot of dam construction has been promoted so that a lot of money could be siphoned off. Forget the arguments against big dams by the Narmada Bachao Andolan, for example, that this is something which is bad, wrong, etc. I'm not going into that. That's another discussion for another day. The point is, my question is simple. Have these dams achieved the purpose for which they were built? What was the purpose? As the Honorable Prime Minister says, Har Khet Ko Pani. Right? That's the name of a program to initiated after he became Prime Minister. Absolutely correctly sums up what should be the goal of irrigation programs. Har Khet Ko Pani. But the point is, the water of these dams, trillions of liters of water is stored in these dams. It is not reaching the people for whom it is meant. Dam आपने बनाया था किसान के लिए, किसान को पानी नहीं मिल रहा. What you do is, you construct the main dam, you construct the main canal. I don't know if you have ever seen the main canal of a large, if you've seen the Narmada Sardar Sarovar main canal, it's like a river. I mean, it's so huge and so many people were displaced to build that. But the main canal doesn't carry the water to the farmer's field. For that, you need many, many smaller channels, the last mile connectivity as we call it. And that can only be achieved by people's participation, by water users associations. The work pioneering this was done actually in Gujarat when the Honorable Prime Minister was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. Later it was done in Madhya Pradesh when I was the Member Planning Commission and I was handling Madhya Pradesh along with the Chief Minister. We increased irrigated area through participatory irrigation management, what is called participatory irrigation management, by 5 times. That had never been achieved in human history. In 5 years, 5 times increase in irrigated area by involving the farmers in the management and governance of water. So what they would do is to handle the water in their part of the command area and make sure that all farmers pay a certain irrigation service fees and ensure that each farmer will get water even if it's at the tail end. So a command area is a huge area, so some farmers are right at the end of the irrigation command. And everybody in an equitable manner getting their water is what is important. And that requires social mobilizers, social workers. If you take any water department in this country, any government, central government, state government, there are only civil engineers or irrigation engineers. There is no agronomist, there is no river ecologist, and there is no social worker. There is nobody who has the capacity to mobilize people, to explain to them why collective action is required to solve a common pool resource problem. And so you need a very different approach to solve the problem like water. And again, groundwater. 40 million wells and tube wells exist in this country and they are increasing by the day. How will you have a system of license quota permit? The old government system where we should control how much each farmer is using groundwater. So let's send inspectors and let them control. You know what will happen if an inspector goes to a village? Basically, the farmers will, kitna chahiye yaar, bol. And he's come from such a long distance, so he say, okay, give me this much and I'll go home. And that's why it has never worked, it's never been attempted. What has worked is participatory groundwater management, where farmers who are the users of an aquifer come together. It's very difficult, I must tell you. It's not that by just saying it happens. It takes years of hard work because people are not used to this. The ideology of capitalism has permeated so deeply into our consciousness that we do not understand how we can actually, that this water which lies in an aquifer belongs to all of us. ये साझा संपत्ति है, इसको हमें मिलके बांट के यूज करना होगा in a sustainable manner. So your cropping pattern also has to change. So there are a lot of things that are required to solve the water problem. I've just given you a brief summary here. I know the time is running out, but it's just to illustrate the point that neither privatization nor government control are going to solve the problem of water. You need firstly an intersectoral understanding. Agriculture is the largest consumer of water in this country. Unless you change the cropping pattern, 3 crops in Indian agriculture take away 80% of the water. Wheat, rice and sugarcane. We are growing sugarcane in Maharashtra, we are growing wheat and rice in Punjab and Haryana. I mean, nothing could be more absurd than that. Yes, during the Green Revolution that was an imperative, but now it's 50 years since the Green Revolution was initiated. Are we never going to learn the lessons? So we have to move away from chemical farming, we have to move away from monocultures of wheat and rice, we have to introduce millets, pulses and oil seeds, which India has the richest repository of these crops. India has always had so many millets, pulses and oilseeds which we are neglecting. And we are trying to impose a monoculture of palm oil in this country, which is the biggest disaster, man-made disaster which can happen to India, because we have so many kinds of edible oils which are so nutritious, so low in water consumption. And how wonderful it would be if in the world's largest nutrition programs, the midday meal scheme and the Anganwadi scheme, we could introduce these as in the menu. Then you would have a great demand for these less water consuming crops, and you could actually potentially solve India's water problem. And fundamentally, as I already said, adopt the principle of subsidiarity. What is the principle of subsidiarity? Involve the people closest to the problem in finding solutions to that problem. That has to be the principle. It's not privatization, not nationalization. I would say if there has to be a mantra, it has to be the principle of subsidiarity, which would help to try and solve problems like water in this country. So, this is my last slide, just to summarize. A lot of things which I said earlier, we can have a longer discussion, but all I'm saying is we need a new vision, understanding and definition of reform. Since the 90s, reform normally should mean anything that makes things better, right? Has been equated with liberalization, privatization, globalization. But as I said, every sector of the economy has some specific features, and reform has to be defined in a sector-specific, issue-specific manner, with much greater imagination than this magic bullet approach, which is really what the Planning Commission has also done since independence. Have magic bullet solutions. Let there be tube wells. Let there be eucalyptus, a tree, because somebody went to Australia on these trips which the officials like, and they say, "Yaar, ye पेड़ बहुत तेजी से उगता है, इसको लगा दो," because that time there was a big shortage of paper in the country and wood. So you say, okay, put eucalyptus. Now eucalyptus destroyed India's water table because it's a very fast water consuming crop, because people forgot that it was growing in the Australian swamps. So ecology is fundamental to understand. A tree which grows in waterlogged regions, we put it in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Central India, and created a problem of water by using this magic bullet conception of change and reform. As I said, because these are wicked problems, there is no one simple solution. We have to think in the degree of complexity that is warranted by the nature of each sector. And therefore, the debate should not be about whether we should have larger or smaller governments. This is a famous article actually, which is titled "Better Government is Better." So it's about how to make government systems function better. And that requires adoption of the principle of subsidiarity. If you take health, education. Now, why are teaching outcomes better in South India than in the North Indian Hindi heartland? Because the mothers in those schools, in those regions are so actively involved and are regulating and monitoring what the teachers do, what the midday meal cooks do. Never will you find a midday meal cooked badly and going unchallenged by the parents in those schools. But in North India, that kind of accountability mechanism is missing. So without strengthening democracy at the grassroots, you cannot have a model of inclusive and sustainable development, is the thought that I would like to leave you with. Thank you.